during the tour and during the tasting. So of course, during all the tour, if you have any questions, feel free. And if you want to take pictures, enjoy. There is Of course, feel free to come closer in the shade. Easter of the vineyard, but just before that, at the end of the tour and the tasting, if you want, you can go back in the garden. Everything is in the Braxis. And you made so that there is just in the middle of the garden a beautiful Rolls Royce. In fact, you need to imagine that the actual owner, Mr. Bernard Magret, is a passionate of wine, but also a passionate of art, especially beautiful car. And his favorite brand is Rolls Royce. And there is in front of you the reproduction of his favorite model of Royce, that is a Rolls Royce Silver Cloud 2, full of bottle of Pope Clement. And if you look slightly on the left, there is also a beautiful verrière. This is in fact a Gustave Eiffel style verrière that was bought by Mr. Bernard Magret in 1978 in Annecy and bring back piece by piece at Pope Clement. It took around 2 years to rebuild everything, and nowadays it will be mainly used for professional tasting, seminar and cocktail. And finally, slightly behind the Rolls Royce, there is a small bushes, and this bushes is in the shape of an arrow. And in fact, this arrow bushes is the beginning of a tour around the exotic garden of Pope Clement. This is like 10 minutes of walk, and this is just gorgeous. So feel free to do it after the tasting. The vineyard is different. Here we are at the vineyard of De la Motte, and the vineyard of De la Motte is owned by the family de Got, a very famous family in the Bordeaux region. And this family de Got has 5 children. To be even more precise, in fact, 5 sons. Between these 5 sons, 2 are very famous, Bertrand and Gaillard de Got. First, Gaillard de Got inherited the vineyard, so he will be the owner after the death of the parents. For Bertrand, it will be a bit more complex. It will be the one that will be sent to the church directly. And in fact, he will quickly become Archbishop of Bordeaux in 1299. And in 1299, he will also become the owner of the vineyard because his brother Gaillard will die because of a sickness and he don't have any child. So in 1299, the owner here is in fact Bertrand de Got. And 2 years later, this same Bertrand de Got in 1305 will become Pope thanks to the help of Philippe le Bel, the King of France by this time. And he will take the name of Pope Clement V. And that's why since 1305 we are called Chateau Pope Clement. In fact, because the Pope Clement used to be the owner here. Speaking a bit more about this Pope Clement, he is very famous about wine because it will be also the first Pope to live in south of France, next to Avignon at the Cité des Papes. And maybe you heard about some appellation for wine near Avignon, such as Châteauneuf-du-Pape, Baccarat, Gigondas, Pomme de Venise, Rachetot. All this appellation, in fact, will be initiated by Pope, especially Pope Clement V. Of course, officially, he will be the owner here until his death in 1314. And as you may imagine, he is on the church, so he don't have any legitimate child. So he will give the vineyard to the Bordeaux Archbishop. And the Bordeaux Archbishop will be the owner here until our French Revolution in 1789. That means that for more than 400 years here at Pope Clement, we'll do wine for ceremony, we'll do wine for the church. Of course, a few years after the French Revolution, the vineyard will be sold in auction and we'll start having here private owners. In total here we had 5 different private owners. At the beginning, 2 bankers will be the owner here until 1860. And in 1860 we'll have here someone iconic called Jean-Baptiste Leclerc. In fact, this is thanks to him that we have nowadays a castle in the middle of the garden. He will build a castle in 1864. But he will do way more than just building the castle. He will also decide to increase the size of the vineyard. Just to give you an idea, when the Pope Clement used to be the owner here, we had in total 8 hectares. We were a very small vineyard on the Pessac-Léognan region. When Jean-Baptiste Leclerc will bought the vineyard, he will bought 32 other hectares around the vineyard. That means that in 1870 we have already approximately 40 hectares of vine. And 40 hectares of vine here, I would say it's a kind of average size for a vineyard in Pessac-Léognan. Still, the thing that is very special is that in fact these 40 hectares of vine are all located around the castle in a small geographic area. Let's imagine we all go on helicopters and we fly, let's say 10 meters above the castle. All the vine that you see here are owned by Pope Clement, and that represents roughly 40 hectares of vine. Just to finish with the number of hectares of vine, nowadays in total we have more than 40. In fact, in total we have 87 hectares. And it's mainly because by law here, you are allowed to have vine in a circle of 10 kilometers around your castle. So of course we have our main plot here, 40 hectares in Pessac, but you will find vine of Pope Clement in Léognan, 5 kilometers from here, Marcillac, Villeneuve-d'Ornon, and so on. And this is how you reach in total 87, 67 for red wine, and 20 hectares for the white wine. So for the moment, do everything is clear? Do you have any question? In 1855 it's pretty simple. In fact, Napoleon III will ask to the wine broker of Bordeaux to create a classification in order to send the best bottle of wine of Bordeaux at the Exposition Universal at Paris. And you need to imagine that the wine broker is in charge of selling wine. So in order to do the classification, he will base the classification on something he knows. And he knows one thing for sure, the price. And this is how we'll do the first classification in Bordeaux, based on price mainly. If the price is high, that should mean that the quality is also high, so you become Grand Cru Classé. And that's why the majority of the Grand Cru Classé in 1855 will be located in two precise regions. Sauternes for the sweet wine, that used to be called the golden wine, the wine of the king, and that was also the favorite wine of Napoleon III. And the second region was the Médoc, mainly for the red wine. And in fact here in the Graves region, we'll have in total only one vineyard that will become Grand Cru Classé of 1855. It will be the very famous Château Aubryon. But it's the only one. And that's why almost 100 years after that, all the vineyards of the Graves region will decide to create a new classification, because they were considering that one Grand Cru Classé is not really enough to prove the quality of our wine here on this region. So we'll start a new classification in 1953, and we'll officialize this classification in 1959. And since 1959, Pope Clement is one of the 16 Grand Cru Classés of the Graves region. Speaking about the other 15 Grand Cru Classés of Graves, maybe you heard about Château Smith-Lafitte, Château Carbonieux, La Tour Marcillac, Château Chevalier, Aubailly, La Mission Aubryon, Château Aubryon, and so on. All these vineyards are also part of the Graves classification. And for me, there is three main things to know about Graves classification. First, in fact, this classification was done once, and it will never change. Because like the wine of 1855, when you are Grand Cru Classé here, you will be Grand Cru Classé forever, no matter what. That's why, for example, at Pope Clement, we are Grand Cru Classé only for red wine, because we were only producing red. It will be in 1970 that we'll start producing white wine. Unfortunately, the classification was already done, so white wine here is not Grand Cru Classé. The second specificity is that we are all located in a very small geographic area. You need to imagine that Graves region is a huge region for wine. It's starting from top of Bordeaux, Mérignac, and finishing after the city of Langon, around 35 kilometers straight. The thing is that the 16 Grand Cru Classés of Graves are all located between two cities, Pessac, Léognan. And this region is called nowadays Pessac-Léognan region. And this is due to the quality of the soil, because in Pessac-Léognan we are at the border between two types of soil. And of course I will explain you why in about a few minutes in front of one plot of vine. And the final specificity is that the 16 Grand Cru Classés of Graves are all at the same level. There is not a first one, a second one, a third one, and so on. We are all first Grand Cru Classés of Graves, let's say. So once again, do everything is clear for classification? Mm-hmm. Do some of you have some question about that?
Have you had any discussion about classifying a new vineyard or new chateau, or declassify the farm as it's in Saint-Emilion? Or?
Well, it's a good question in parallel to Saint-Emilion. In fact, mainly no. In fact, on our left bank here, we don't want to change nothing. And it's mainly because if you start changing things, it's become very, very difficult. Yeah. In fact, nowadays, more than just classification, a lot of money is involved on this kind of classification, so it's very difficult to change something. And if you go on the right bank in Saint-Emilion, that's true, every 10 years the classification is changing. The thing is that every 10 years it's a big mess to find a new one, to remove the one that don't deserve to be Grand Cru Classé anymore, and so on and so on. That's why for the moment here on the left bank we don't want to change nothing. But it's, I would say, a pity for some time, because there is some vineyards that deserve to be Grand Cru Classé and that are not. Or even Pope Clement, if I use the example here, our white wine is nowadays considered even better than the red, but it's not Grand Cru Classé. So well, that's true that sometimes some change will be needed. That's why also classification used to be very, I would say, very accurate, but nowadays you can find plenty of wine that are not Grand Cru Classé that are definitely at a very high level in Bordeaux. So it's not something to take at 100% as sure, I would say. Once again, everything is clear about what we are currently doing and how was this 2023 vintage. So let's start from the soil. As I said, the 16 Grand Cru Classés of Graves are all located in Pessac-Léognan. And it's mainly because in Pessac-Lognan you are at the border between Grave type of soil and clay limestone type of soil. Grave type of soil is made of small gravel, and this gravel has the capacity to take the heatness during the day and give it back during the night. So it's perfect when you want to reach maturity for some grape that need a lot of maturity here in Bordeaux, such as Cabernet Sauvignon and Petit Verdot. So we'll grow Cabernet Sauvignon and Petit Verdot in Grave type of soil. But as I said, we have also clay limestone type of soil, and usually you find this type of soil on the right bank. For example, on the beautiful appellation of Saint-Emillion. And in Saint-Emillion they are using two of the grapes for red, Merlot, Cabernet Franc. This will be exactly the same for us. On one side Petit Verdot, Cabernet Sauvignon, on the other side Merlot, Cabernet Franc. Plus, as I said, here you are allowed to have vine in a circle of 10 kilometers around. If we need to have more clay type of soil, we go in Lognan 3 kilometers from here, and so on and so on. So you can always pick the type of grape depending on the type of plant. We are also very famous for the quality of the white wine, and of course you will be able to discover that during the tasting. For the white grape, we mainly use Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon, that are our two main grapes, and we'll use a bit of Muscadel and Sauvignon Gris for the final blend to balance the wine. The harvest of white grape at Pope Clement. In fact, we were starting the harvest this year, the 24th of August, and we finished the harvest of white grape yesterday afternoon. In fact, you need to imagine that we were starting by Sauvignon Blanc, Sauvignon Gris, we finished Semillon and Muscadel, and now we are moving to reds. We'll start the harvest of red grape today, and we were supposed to harvest Merlot, part of the plot of Merlot today. After we'll go Cap Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, and we'll finish by Petit Verdot. And we suppose that we'll finish the harvest for Pope Clement around the 25th to 26th of September. That is something quite unconventional, I would say. In fact, you need to imagine that some years ago in Bordeaux, let's say 20 years ago, harvest was starting the middle of September and finishing the middle of October, even end of October sometime. But nowadays, because of the global warming, climate change, in fact, the harvest is starting earlier and we're finishing earlier, and it's basically mainly because the maturity is already there and the sugar concentration is already very high. Just to give you an idea, 20 years ago, a bottle of red wine Bordeaux was like 12 degrees on the bottle. Nowadays it's like 14.5, and this is once again due to the climate change. I would say 2023 is not the best example for that, but 2022 was a very warm, very hot weather, and we had some harvest where basically we were harvesting a Merlot that was at potential at 16. That was very, very, very high. Not on all our plot, of course, but some of our plots were reaching 16 in potential. That is definitely very high, or even too high for Bordeaux. That's why we are starting always to harvest earlier. It's a flying bronze.
So you use some kind of filter to
Exactly. I won't be able to go in detail.
No,
I don't
fine.
have all the detail, but yes, definitely.
Okay.
We'll be able to recognize from some small captors that give you, in fact, this information.
You also use a drone for spraying.
Spraying, treatment,
How
you
do you
mean?
apply the sulfur?
Oh
Is it
no.
powder? Is it misted?
Oh no, it's we use tractors, and we spray it with tractors, and we have new kind of tractors that have a kind of recuperation. In fact, when you treat, part of the treatment will go on the vine, on the leaf, and so on, and the other part sometimes will go directly on the soil. So we have some recuperation tool on the side in order to avoid having part of the treatment that don't go where we want to be, where we want to have the treatment to take
capture.
to capture exactly. So finally, about the vine here, I will conclude by giving you an average age of these plots. Here we have a plot around 30 to 60 years. It's always an average because we do co-plantation. That means that when one is dying, you put a new one. So in average, this plot is around 30 to 60 years, and it will be mainly used for Pope Clement first label Grand Cru Classé. In fact, we always try to have the maximum of concentration on our first label. That's why we use old plot of vine. And of course, that means also that we have younger plot of vine in rotation, and this younger plot of vine will be used for Clementin and Lamb of Pope Clement, that are respectively second label and third label of the estate. So everything at the end is used, but not always on the same wine. Of course, the thing that I'm just giving you is 99–95% of the time true. But of course, at the end, it's the winemaker that decide. And in case of balance, sometimes you can use a bit of young grape to, I would say, balance your old plot of vine with a very high concentration on some vintage, and so on and so on. But 90% of the time, Pope Clement first label is done with old grape, old vine, I would say, with high concentration.
What's the oldest vine you have?
To generate extraction, but I would say, because I would say naturally you have a kind of liquid solid mixed, in fact, naturally symbiosis. On this tool, it's even better. Instead of doing my pushing down, my pumping over and so on, I just need to do a rotation and I will move the vat upside down, and it will be even better to mix the solid part with the liquid part. So currently it's only innovation, it's something that we are using just to try, but in about a few years maybe it will be something that we'll use a bit more on Haut Cremant wine. And it's kind of new tool for innovation.
My name is Benjamin. I'm sommelier here, and I'm in charge of the shop, of the wine shop. So today we're gonna do the tasting of 3 wines together. So we will start by white dry wine with Le Clémentin de Pas Clément. Then you're lucky today because I have Chateau Bordeaux opened. It's a wine from Saint-Emillion, a Grand Cru classé, another Grand Cru classé belong that Mr. Maillet. And of course we finish by the best for appearance. Okay? So in first, I invite you to serve yourself a glass of dry wine. Sorry for my French accent. Okay, I know it's a really good French accent. But serve yourself, take a glass.
Yep.